to be here today with Emily Tamayo Maher, author of The Meaning Method, A Spiritual Path to Writing and Publishing. Emily, welcome. Just so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad we met.
Me too. Me too. I am so thankful that we met up, and I'm so happy to get your book. I'm going to go ahead and pop that up in the stream. So the meaning method, a spiritual path to writing and publishing. So where did the idea of this book come from, Emily?
So it's so funny. It actually came to me in 2015. So I am about to go into my 5th year of business as an author coach. But I think this is fun to know because before I was an author coach, I was a teacher, a school teacher for many years. And I was thinking about starting a business. And I'll never forget the summer of 2015. I was walking to catch a bus. And the idea of the meaning method just really came to me in the middle of the street. I sat down on a bench. I missed the bus.
Wow.
I wrote it all down. And I published the first edition in 2017. Being a full-time teacher with a toddler at home, it did take me time to write, but I wrote it and I launched the business. And so now this is actually the 2nd edition. And after years of working with people and really understanding where their blocks are around writing books, what gets in the way, I've just rewritten it so it really serves people to get their books out into the world.
Awesome. That is so awesome. So when you were jotting down the ideas for this book and you missed the bus, what were some of the things that you were jotting down?
In the introduction to the book, it talks about catharsis. And so initially, the idea of the meaning method was, it's a spiritual path to writing and publishing. And what was the first thing that really came to me is the idea that, we live our lives with doing the things that are practical, doing the things we have to do, keeping our day jobs, so to speak. And we can get stuck in never being able to reflect and never really being able to see the full meaning and the full value of our lives. And so that first lightning bolt was around the idea of catharsis and what art is really for. And the idea that when we express ourselves and we write something down, it gives value to a human life. It gives significance to the things we go through every day. And that's why in this world, which is so practical, which is so driven, which is so rush, I wanted to create a clear and beautiful path for people to just sit down and make meaning out of the things that touch them and turn it into something beautiful.
That is so amazing. And I'm just blown away by this book. I feel like it has found me, or I have found it at exactly the right time in my life when I've been struggling to write a memoir for years. And I've started to kind of talk about that a little bit on this show. And so you share so many nuggets of wisdom in this book that are both deep and yet simple and easily understandable. And I feel like I'm highlighting so much of your book where it's, and highlighting in different colors and taking screenshots and all of that. You say, that you are always enough to take the next step. And what a beautiful message for anyone who's struggling to do anything, but especially doing something creative like writing.
Thank you. And I thank you so much. That's my dream come true, is that this book can be an entry point where you're always enough to take the next step. You no longer feel like you need to question what your soul is calling you to do. And you can just take those little steps one after another and have a path to follow. And so at the end of every single chapter, I provide easy action steps to keep you moving forward. But I also have little one-liners, little mantras for whatever step you're at. So, you can just repeat what repeat to yourself whatever resonates. Another one is, I know it takes more energy to repress
Yes.
creativity than express creativity. Just reminding, we worry about time, we worry about different things, but actually all the time you spend not doing what your heart is calling for is using up a lot of energy. It's putting you in survival mode. And so when you can just flip over with these little lines that we have to keep reminding ourselves, you're always enough to take the next step, etc. I wanted to put those little one-liners in it too, so that you can just remind
Well, I
yourself,
feel like there
keep
are
going,
so
keep
many
going.
of those great one-liners in the book, everything
Well, thank you.
regarding life and writing. And I also really enjoyed your quote. And again, I've already got it. I'm just going to show you guys, like, I've already got these right here on little sticky notes that, I'll probably be posting right next to my desk so that I remember these things. But another, yeah,
Those work
yeah.
so
Well, and
well.
another one is
Affirmations,
no one
yes.
combines your experience with your inspiration. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you. And actually, I would love to use that as an entry point to kind of introduce the chakras a little bit, because there's actually a spiritual reason behind that quote that I love to explain. And so, if anyone has any questions about that, I'll go deeper into the chakras in a moment. But one thing in the spiritual path to writing and publishing, there are chakras that run along your body. They're energy centers that help you both lead to spiritual transcendence, spiritual liberation, which is a wonderful state to be in, to become more spiritual. But then there's also the path I talk about is the manifesting path down the chakras, where you start with your spiritual connection. We all have a spiritual connection at whatever point at any time, and just saying yes to this point of, perhaps if you're not deep into a spiritual connection, a point of inspiration, and bringing it into the world. And so basically what that quote means from a spiritual perspective is, we're all going through our lives and we're growing upwards, we're learning things, we're gaining experience, and nobody has the exact experience you have. And then we are also receiving inspiration. We're receiving the whispers for that memoir, the thing we want to share, that romance novel that has been whispering to us day after day, month after month, year after year. And so that's actually so individual. Nobody combines exactly what you've been through with exactly what your soul is calling you to do. And so when you can just step into that and take small actions one at a time, you would not believe the I'll call it a
Mhm.
flower, that blossoms up with so many petals, just can blossom out of that. And I think it's so
I think it
exciting.
is exciting too. And one thing that I'd like to, clarify up front. So, do you feel that your book, is accessible to people regardless of their faith tradition, or if they don't have a faith tradition or a particular notation around spirituality?
Yes, and I love talking about this because, so the chakras are talked about a lot in yoga, and just like anybody can enter a yoga class, anybody can do this. But I know that sometimes some of these abstract spiritual ideas can be a little confounding, and so it's interesting. Different people who are atheists, people from different spiritual traditions, have all come into my community and my group. And I like to draw parallels. Of course, if at any time anybody has a question between a specific spiritual tradition, but one that's known in many traditions is the halo. So if you're talking about a halo, that's your spiritual
Mm.
connection, your spiritual connection to the divine. Not only saints have halos, we all have a connection
Mhm.
to the divine. And so in chakra language, that's called the crown chakra. It's just the place you receive inspiration that can add so much meaning to your life, and it can add so much
Mm.
meaning to your book. And so we kind of all receive inspiration in spirit from that halo, that crown chakra, and then the various chakras. And I suppose I'll talk about it through the downward path, the manifesting path through the chakras. So your crown chakra or your halo is where you receive wisdom, insight, these different things that help us along our life path. And then when you're going down, the next thing you get to is your imagination, the third eye. This is where you begin to visualize and fantasize what your book might be, what your dream might be, what might be coming next in your life. It doesn't have to be hallucinogenic or anything out of this world. It really simply is, it's related to the pineal gland, the gland that helps you dream when you sleep. And so the third eye is the next chakra down. It's where dreams come from. And so in this path, we go from that first whisper, that first inspiration, to being able to both in a practical way outline a book, put those first ideas down onto paper in an organized structure, but also fantasize what it means. Think about those characters and visualize those characters. Before we know it, we're getting down to the throat chakra, which is where we're experimenting and scribbling and sketching without any inner critic, tamping down that inner critic and just allowing ourselves to play on paper and experiment with our voice. The more you make a habit of just experimenting with your voice, the more is going to come out. And it's kind of funny. I've noticed often when I've worked with clients, they'll actually get a physical cold or they'll lose their voice because they're kind of just putting their ideas and their words out there for the first time. And if anything felt stuck, like this is an emotional part. In grade school, we may have had teachers that kind of clamped down on our voice. There are so many different places where we can get blocked. And it's so wonderful to open that back up in a playful, experimenting way. Next chakra, and if you have any more questions about this chakra, your heart chakra. I know we can all feel that glow, that glowing warmth of energy when we love someone or when we love a creative project. This is the dedicated, loving relationship. I call it changing the diapers of the book because I felt that way about my book and I felt that way about my baby. And so it's just that thing that keeps us connected and keeps us coming back during the ups and downs. And we have that dedicated, devoted is another word I love. It's that devotional energy that we can kind of feel it right here. When we're in the heart chakra, loving the creative process, coming back to it day after day. Then in the process of writing a book, we go to the solar plexus, which is going pro. The solar plexus is the center of willpower. So we're willing it into that more professional place where just above the heart chakra, we were experimenting and playful. We get to be more free with our throat chakra if we know we're going to edit it and we're going to perfect it. And when it gets down to that stage, we don't need to do it in the beginning because as we get closer to publishing, we'll take care of that professional stage. Then the sacral chakra is birthing the book. We're going down the body and we're getting to birthing that book. And then finally, in my process, the root chakra is creating stability, growing out those roots. I reach out to people like roots of a tree to connect it to people. And so it gets grounded. It starts to take on a life of its own. And it just becomes a part of this great earth, which is what we want for our creative projects. We want them to have an impact in the earth. So that's kind of, that's a little bit of an explanation and why no matter what spiritual tradition, definitely many writers like Carolyn Myss have written about the connections of these kind of the sacred heart, as a part of so much Christian art. These are things that transcend any individual religion. And they're really something that's universal, no matter what you believe in. These are stages and energies and steps that you can really flow into and and get a lot of wisdom from as you're going through the process. So this chakras are Vedic. So they come from the Vedas, at the Vedic tradition, beginning in India, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. They were passed down through oral tradition before they were in a written tradition. But yeah, there's a lot of information on it, but that's where they
Well,
come
and I
from.
appreciate just that you ran through those energy centers and, talk about where, where that lodges in the body and how, that can help with creativity. And I guess I would also just suggest that, for any writer for whom chakra is, maybe a bit of a block, a bit of a stumbling block, that maybe if they, would you recommend just kind of thinking of it as an energy center in your body? Is that a more of a term that maybe could neutralize a little bit if people are unfamiliar or not as comfortable with that term?
Yes, and absolutely, because there's actually at each of these phases in the body, each of these spaces in the body, there's both an endocrine gland and a nerve plexus. So not only are these kind of energetic centers symbolic in, medical literature, we know we know the heart center and the nerve plexus that's in the heart is often informing the brain with emotional information. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is at each of these centers, we actually have a physical endocrine gland and we have a nerve plexus. And so the nerve plexus transmits electric energy. Your nerves are always transmitting ionic potassium. I'm going to try not to get too
We're getting deep
nerdy,
into
but
metaphysics.
they're transmitting electric energy. Exactly. I've read way too much about this, so I'll take it a step back.
You're clearly showing your expertise there,
yes,
that you have studied this really deeply. But go ahead.
I love this stuff. So yes, at each of these centers, you have an electric energy center, and then you also have an endocrine gland or a hormonal chemical energy center. And so that's another reason that when you're focusing on your heart, the nerves that are in the organ of your heart are starting to synchronize, and then you can start to feel more centered, feel more loving, and all of those different things. So yes, you do not have to be a religious freak like me, a spiritual freak like me, to be able to understand this. No matter what you're into, there's a lot of information and wisdom that can be found from the body, that can be found inside these different nerve plexuses. Or if you want to look at a religious tradition, they've been mapped to the sacraments in Catholicism. So yes, there's just a resonance that you can enter this wisdom from different lenses and different traditions. So don't feel like I'm ever going to try to convert you to a belief system. These are things, just as these stages from imagining to editing are just the things you go through when you're writing a book. They can also be translated into different kinds of creative projects. Every creative project has a moment when you want to go pro. Every creative project has a moment when you're hearing these first whispers. So I promise not to convert you to a new religion. That's my statement. And
well, I just appreciate clarifying too that it's a universal language and wisdom that is translatable across many faiths, and I think that that's something that might help more people to access it. And of course I think that's the goal, just helping people understand the universal wisdom and creativity that are involved here. And I just want to show really quick show/share. I know this is going to show up really well, but this is your chart, which I had posted on Facebook a little while ago, that I printed out and put on my wall. So Emily created this, and it shows the different chakras or energy centers, and the creative stage that it matches up with, and then the common block. So as an example, it has crown. The creative stage is inspiration. The common block is, who am I to write this? Chakra, third eye, big vision and outline. Overwhelm. Definitely been there, and continue to be there sometimes. Throat, find your voice, inner critic judgment. Heart, writing process, procrastination. Definitely been there many times. Solar plexus, finish and edit, and the common block is that it's hard and boring. The name,
And you got to
absolutely.
use that willpower
Navel,
to get
the
through
creative
it.
stage is publishing. The common block is lack of clarity. And then with the root chakra, build your audience, and the common block is self-doubt. So how did you begin to identify what these blocks were at each of the creative stages?
There are a few different ways. It really came over working with people over and over again over time. And so one thing I love about this is it's kind of fun with that quote you mentioned at the beginning. You're always enough to take the next step. So when I was working with people, of course, when I was doing initial consultation, um, a lot of people in that first stage, they're getting the whispers. They would also, worry, who is ever going to buy this? Who am I going to write this? What am I going to do, etc. And so they were in this initial stage, and
Mhm.
then fretting was coming up, just different worries. And so that's one reason I love taking this stage by stage, especially in these subtle stages, because often before we even have a single word written down, we'll worry about who's my publisher. And the fact is that when you take these stages one at a time and you work with people in these stages one at a time, you realize, guess what? You don't have to worry about your marketing plan yet. You just have to write down the first words. And so this is how I put that chart together. As I was working with people through the various stages, I would notice what was stopping them from going into that place. And so I have actually a chapter in the book is titled All
Yes.
Writer's Blocks Are Chakra Blocks, because they are at any given stage. Yes. At any given stage, you might worry about something in particular, which does mean you're having a little fear about going into that block. And so who am I to write this? Why should I ever write this? Why should I even bother? Is in that upper stage. And then you just take it down through these different stages, and different things come up. You kind of gave all the blocks, but another one that I'll talk about, the book goes into detail in all these different stages. But again, this throat chakra, often in women, is very blocked. And so when it gets there, it's hard to, it's an easy place to give up. You may talk about writing a book a lot and not actually go into that nurturing, regular practice. You can't find the time, etc. And so for instance, with a throat block, if you find yourself wishing and dreaming and even talking about the book all the time, but you just can't get into that practice, something, you never find the time, something comes up in creating that regular writing practice, often just loving it up and just loving yourself for missing an artist date, creating some romance around that, and then bringing yourself into that heart chakra, where, much like a mom, you're just like, okay, if you haven't learned to walk yet, I'm loving you up. That's okay. We'll try to learn to walk another day. You got sick? Guess what? I'm not giving up on you. I'm going to still try again. Yeah. We're still going to go after it. And so it's just a really great way to realize at the beginning, you don't have to publish tomorrow. There are a lot of small decisions that are going to come in between the first part of the process and the last part of the process. And you're just always enough to take the next step. And there's going to be a way to do it.
I definitely have some more questions about the throat chakra, kind of from a couple of different levels. So
go for it. Yeah.
So I hear you saying that if you're having an issue in the throat chakra, that maybe it's something where you're talking a lot about wanting to do the book. And again, been there for a long time, wanting to do the book, but not necessarily, buckling down and doing the hard work of the writing. So is there a sense that with that, that challenge that do you almost need to silence your actual voice about it and kind of force that voice into the writing rather than just saying, I want to write a book and I want to do this and this means so much to me and let me tell you all about it. Let me tell you about this idea. Is there a certain element, again, almost that seems kind of, ironic or catch-22 here, that it's almost like you're freeing the throat chakra by temporarily shutting down your chattiness about the project?
I definitely agree with that, and it's been proven in so many ways. And this is the big bridge between all of these upper chakras and the lower chakras. And so we'll talk a little bit about a way to get through that. But yes, when you talk about a book, when you dream about a book, your brain is going to a place where it's actually real. You're getting this momentary shot of dopamine or reward around the book, but you're not moving forward. And so there's just this kind of very light energy, which is lovely about the upper chakras. If I ever want to be a rock star, all I have to do is put on a song and I can see it. I'm already a rock star. But it's not fulfilling. It's not physically fulfilling. It's not economically fulfilling, and it doesn't make a difference in your life because the real switch hasn't happened yet. So this is the way to do this. In that chapter of the book, which is around the throat chakra, I'm doing a lot about habit formation because the act is just to continually come back.
Oh,
And
sure,
I think
that's
I have some little
okay.
ones coming in the
We
background.
welcome little
Excuse
ones.
that.
That's all right. It's all good.
Yes, we got a couple of little ones today. I think one had to go to the bathroom because that bathroom's in the house. They're having a wonderful time outside today. But going to this throat chakra is in this chapter of the book. I have so many different steps around habit formation, both about expressing yourself and creating positive habits where you're actually physically writing things down and experimenting with your voice on paper, and also quieting that fear and getting into habits about being able to overcome the fears you might have, because those are the things that keep your book project in those upper chakras. The fear that comes up is that if I devote time to this, I think often, what if I fail, or what if something goes wrong? You can also use this metaphor in business. If someone is talking about a business a lot, but it takes that extra push of courage to actually go through and make it a reality, because then, then failure might come in. Then you really are putting yourself on the line. If you keep coming back to this over and over again, what's going to happen with it? And then you feel that you've invested in it, and then that can get a little scary. And so the important thing to do is to love it up, bring it into that heart chakra, create a safe, loving space to do it. I will go to a cafe where I do not regret a moment I've spent on my book. I love spending that time on my book, and I love up the process. And so it doesn't feel as risky because I love it. And then sure enough, because I put so much love and care into the process, I'm not holding back. I also nurture my audience and love my audience as well. These things all come together through that power of the heart chakra. And so I think to be able to get down is just put some good old love into it. I guess I'm going to use the mom metaphor again. These little ones, if they go to Harvard, if they go to this, if they go to that, I'm not betting the farm on some outcome in the end. I'm loving every single day with them as they come into being. And that actually gives them a better chance of being better human beings, rather than, yelling at them that every day of their childhood. When are you going to get a job already? Come on. So yeah, it's the same with a book. If you can really embrace the process and start loving it, it starts to simplify, and you'll get those steps forward. But yes, not talking about that all the time, because that's giving you the false feeling of publishing, and then it's actually harder to publish because you feel like you're published
Interesting.
because you've talked
That's
about it.
right.
You
No,
trick
that
your
is
own brain. It's
interesting.
so
Well, and
funny.
my
Yes.
my second question around that involves, so if I found recently that I tend to write better sometimes if I pop in my earbuds or just turn on the speaker on my phone and turn on my notes app and I just start talking and I just start talking things out. I also notice, and I think I'm one of those people who tends to process things more verbally, which also ties into the more talking about the book rather than writing the book. But I feel like it's helping me make faster writing progress because, but again, it's not talking to other people about it. It's more like talking to myself about it or writing, but just in an auditory form versus, a written or typed form. And I also noticed that I have a lot of emotion coming up. And again, I often feel literally choked up in that throat chakra. So is that something that you can, just talk about a little more and help me understand? Like, I know that emotion tends to, come up there, but is it good to, sort of do what's working for you as far as if you're talking out your book versus if you're writing or typing your book?
Absolutely. That can work well. So different people have different processes. And it's funny because I have a friend who does psychological thrillers. She puts out a lot of psychological thrillers. And she at this point has a very good publisher. So she has somebody waiting for a book, every few months, and she goes straight onto her computer and she just does it like this. That's her process. She loves it. She laughs at me because my process is to get out of the house with my coffee and my journal, and then I re-type up everything I write in my journal onto my computer. And so I will say that that's exactly what you're doing. If you're speaking out words and then putting them, and then having them transcribed, that works too. The one catch, which you will know you have, is if it's getting to this point where it's built up disorganized words in a file and you're not loving it up and seeing that through and turning it into final words on the manuscript. So the 2 points there are, yes, it's essential to find a process that you love. Any successful writer has basically just found a weekly process to return to the page in some way or another and turned it into something they love. I know plenty of authors who speak their books. I physically write my book. People think I'm extremely weird. Other people go straight to the computer and they just have, software where they integrate everything together. And so what you want to make sure, as I said, all writer's blocks are chakra blocks. If something is building up and it's not getting into the next stage, then all you have to do is find a way to love that. And so perhaps you speak out your material, you speak out your first draft is a very efficient way to do it. And then once you have, compared to creating new material, just rereading it is so much simpler. You're not approaching a blank page anymore. So you've got to find some way to love doing that, because if you're never looking at it a second time, then yes, that's a problem, because I very few books
Oh,
would
right.
be able to be
Absolutely.
spoken straight out and
Absolutely. No,
published.
it's definitely a more raw form for sure. And I know that it would require, more organization and editing to be able to make it into, a finished piece, even if it was, an article or, a blog post or, something along those lines. So I can definitely see that for sure. Um, yeah, it's just,
That's
and
really
it's something that
exciting
I
though.
only recently discovered. I'd always been just more of a typist, with my articles and things that I've written. And I think with poetry, I tend to more handwrite. So I don't know, maybe different things, again, not only work for different people, but different situations or different, types of writing too. So, but with the throat blockage, or energy issue, do you notice with emotion coming up around that and how is that something that writers can work through?
So, yes, it's an extremely emotional block. It's self expression, it's being oppressed or repressed. It goes, it can go all the way back to early childhood, not having a voice, being silenced. All of those
Mm,
are extremely emotional. And so, being able to creativity is an emotional wave, just like our emotions come to us. They you can feel them through your whole body. They come up to a peak, and then you get to the other side of that wave.
mm,
Creativity works that way too. So basically, you're having an idea, you have some form of self-expression, you ride that emotional peak all the way up. You get it onto the page, you get it out of you, you express it. And then you'll feel as if you've
mm,
had a cathartic experience where then you'll want to go into a time of rest and relax and hopefully pride in what you've done. And so keep working those, just keep on taking it to the page. So you're collecting it in some form. And remember, so the throat chakra is here, and then your emotional center, your heart center is right here. And
mm.
so that is that safe place for self expression to rest. And so that's why really creating that connection between that nurturing, safe habit where you're collecting material into a place, you're sculpting it, you're changing the diapers, as I'm saying. So if you're doing this in a vocal way where you're recording voice notes to be able to collect material the um, for the manuscript, then you want to love it up and change those diapers and really look at what you've
Mhm.
written, sculpt it, and organize it. And so I'm just heart chakraing up that throat, that voice, that vocal expression. Give it more love, bring it into that more grounded step where you're
Mm.
accumulating material. And so it's partially these upper chakras can be very euphoric. It's your imagination, it's your inspiration. It is very emotional. It's extremely emotional. And at any chakra, if you have a block, that's going to be
Mm.
emotional as you go through that block. But what you want to do is you want to accumulate and make it more solid all the way down, because with just the emotional, just these lighter, quicker, fast chakras. I'm thinking about my book. I'm talking my book about my book. Those that happen so quickly. And so with every step, we're making this slower and more solid. And so that's the changing the diapers side of it. It's just slow down, love it enough to take the time. And as the time becomes a habit, it becomes less
Well,
difficult to find it. You make the time just as you would make the time for a
that
relationship
is so
or
fascinating,
anything
Emily.
else.
And these insights are, I think, just so powerful for anyone doing creative work. And I can see, even just in my own life, how I was in the thinking stage for a long, long time on this book, the thinking and the mental wrangling. And then I started
Mhm.
talking about it and, doing interviews. And so then it's more in the speaking and in the throat chakra. And it also, from what you're describing, it sounds like if you're having a block in a certain chakra, is it correct to say that you should start looking at that, the chart that you created, and start looking at that next chakra down? So when you talk about, so then it sounds
Chakra
like what would be
down.
really helpful for me is, again, to bring more, self-love and compassion and, joy around the creative process and, the loving it up, as you say. And so then after you've done some of those things, how can you start to move into, and again, I feel like this is a huge struggle for me, is more that solar plexus energy center that's all about willpower and determination and self discipline, when I feel like those are not necessarily my strong suits at all and something that I struggle with. So, how can I begin to move into that deeper energy center with that.
And this is such a beautiful way of putting it, because remember, it is emotional at first, especially if you have a block. A lot of emotion is going to come up as you're working through that block, whether it's, the silencing of the throat chakra, or if it's the maybe, discipline can be demanding, it can be painful, of that willpower. If there's anything, you might have emotions in the solar plexus too. If there's a block that makes, discipline can be, let's say, punishing, but it doesn't have to be. And so, just so you know, it's the section on the solar plexus that has that chapter that goes through all the different chakras. And what I will say is that, know this: as you go down through these different chakras, we're going down them right now, it gets easier because you are creating a channel. And I don't mean this in a woo-woo way. I mean, literally, once you do it once, you have muscle memory of how to go through this whole process again and again. Once you publish one book, it becomes so much easier to publish the next, because you recognize how to use these different energy centers in a healthy way. So, that said, when you get down to the solar plexus, there are two things I would recommend. First of all, is there any other place in your life where you have followed through? Do you remember what was like? Like, it could be a work project, it could be any other project. Maybe as a child, you were just the bicycle racer of the block and you knew how to get into marathons or whatever. Anything you have worked through all the way, you can apply those same lessons to the book projects that you're working on. So that's something I call transference. And you start to use that muscle memory that you've created in a different part of life, and you start to apply it for that. The other thing I will say about willpower in particular is that it is misunderstood. I think especially in a lot of Western cultures, the perhaps the understanding of willpower can be, do it even if you hate it. And that's not what we want to do. What we want to do is, we want to be able to, like, again, bring the air, bring the space into it, so that, don't make it punishing. If you feel like discipline is punishing, if you have any bad association around discipline, know that you can work it in a positive way. So, for instance, I will say with writing in particular, if you're editing, you can spend hours hunched over your computer, constricting your diaphragm until you feel like you can't breathe and you're breaking out in hives because you need to take a walk. Don't do that to yourself, because it makes discipline really hard. You will remember, oh my God, I remember last week I spent 5 hours at my computer. Please, God, never make me do that again. So, be able to bring both love and air into that discipline. Do it in a way that's following something you love. I know, and this will be the last little explanation I have on discipline. For instance, I'm way overactive in my solar plexus. I am a hard worker. And so I know that for myself, when I was working as a teacher, I would spend hours after school grading papers. I could do it no matter what. And it became extremely destructive to overuse my willpower in a way that was punishing to my relationships and other areas of my life. And so now I really love to bring that insight that I learned from that experience, in that discipline is not the rock in which you're going to build your entire household. It is the follow through that allows you to finish the things you're really passionate about and love. And so, it's not about keeping a job you hate, it's about seeing a book you love through to the end. And so, that's just a little tangent on discipline. It's not in, I think in some cultures, we prize discipline so much that we build our entire lives on it. And then we have lives that we don't love, but we're disciplined enough to accomplish them. And so, yeah, that's not
Absolutely.
the way discipline
And
should
I
be.
did read that part of the book, and I definitely resonated with that too. And where you're clarifying that this doesn't mean like beating yourself against a rock and going to a job that you hate every day, or doing things that you don't find any joy in. And I know you wrote about your own experience with teaching. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. Sure. Yeah, thank you. And so that was, I think there are a lot of people, some people have told me that, 2021 is the great resignation because so many people are looking for work that they love. And I think that speaks to the fact that we've kind of gotten out of balance between discipline and love in some aspects of our culture. And so I was working in a very disciplined school. It was kind of, let's say, an elite private school here in Bogota, Colombia, where I live. And oh my goodness, the children at this school would begin standardized
Mm.
testing when they were 4 years old.
Wow.
Homework started at 4 years old, and there are a lot of schools like that right now. And so by the time I was teaching high school, I've taught a lot of different grades. And so there was a program where kids would have to do so much work, write so many essays, just week upon week upon week. And of course, as the teacher, I would have to correct all of that work. And so I would work late into the night. And there was one particular time where I had made a terrible, well, not a terrible mistake. That again is discipline. Like I
Right.
miscorrected some papers. Nobody died. But at the same time, I miscorrected some papers and I needed to get them handed in on a very strict deadline. And I overworked. I was working about 23 hours. I would sleep for an hour so as not to go
Mm.
insane and then get back at it. And that was where, sometimes our better angels just pull us by the ponytail and is like, and say, look what's happening in your life. My son swallowed the last of a bottle of cold
Oh.
medicine when I wasn't looking because I was so tired. And that was my big moment because why was I working at this school? So my son would be able to get an education, to be able to, raise a family and have a good steady job. And then I saw thing I say in the book is if you're out of balance, if things are getting precarious, that lack of love creates more and more precariousness. And that taking my son with a wonderful woman who helped us, a doctor who helped us, to the emergency room that night,
Mm.
that's when I really saw it. If you're building your stability on discipline alone, that's going to create a precarious relationship. It's much better to create a career, um, as I have around conversations like this, where I'm like, I can't wait to talk about this. I love all this stuff. And so that's something I talk about my transition in a few different chapters because, and also in the end, I do talk about financial dynamics and the 3 profit models I've seen work for different authors so that we can find work that we're
Mm.
passionate about as I have, and we're not building our whole house on
I think that
discipline
that's
like I
so
was.
relatable for so many people too, because I think children are often taught, the harder you work, the better, and school is your job so that you can grow up someday and get a real job that pays money. And this is really your focus. And this is really, what you need to do. And so understanding that, you know, yes, we need to be able to provide for ourselves, but that we also need to have, the fruits of the spirit as well, and have those things in our lives. And so I think that that's a great point that you make as a recovering workaholic perfectionist, kind of person who again always,
Mhm.
who did often devote my time to work and not necessarily my family, not necessarily myself or my own health, not necessarily, developing a more holistic, outlook as a person. So it sounds like this book could be really helpful for people just for rebalancing purposes too.
Yeah, because when you're working solely on discipline, there's so many different parts, inspiration, imagination, that you're just forgetting about for yourself in favor of kind of a conformist system. And so you mentioned perfectionism. As we're going down this chakra system, that's another block that can come up in the solar plexus. It's not good enough. It's not professional enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And so that's where we get down to the publishing decisions, where at some point it's never going to be perfect. It's got to be good enough. And so I also go into specific things with what an edit really is, what going pro really is, so that you're following certain conventions and the book is easy to consume and meets their reader in a way that they can understand it. All of those are great edits, and not tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking for forever in with things that the readers that aren't going to help the readers enter into your book. And so that's when we get into publishing decisions. And before you know it, you're connecting with those people, which is now easier than it's ever been.
That there are many more options for writers available. I think sometimes it's still challenging just to figure out how to navigate that and make those decisions as far as, do you go with traditional publishing? Do you go hybrid? Do you go completely on your own? And so what thoughts do you have about that?
Yes. So I like to do, and in the book, I do talk about just two options, going with traditional press or self-publishing. And the reason I do that is because most hybrid presses are someone's particular business model. And so I am not going to get into anybody's individual business model and give opinions on that. But basically, if you look at the two, hybrid is just the middle between these two that I talk about. And there are definitely places where we need help. And if you can offer it in a way that gives good value and offers and really helps with that particular confusing part, then yes, hybrid is wonderful. And so I work with both traditionally published books, and then I help people self-publish their books. So traditional publishing is really great for things like literary fiction. If you are kind of a one and done author who has an academic audience or anything like that, it's good to put together your book proposals and start to ship that book out so someone else takes care of it. However, I think one thing I do talk about in the book is a lot of people misunderstand that if they go with a traditional publisher, they're going to do everything for them. And that's a thing where you are partnering with the traditional publisher. There is, it's not a fairy godmother, it's a traditional publisher. And so you will do a lot of the marketing. No one is ever going to believe in your book as much as you do. And so no matter what you're doing with your publishing decisions, it's really good to have a handle on the system. This week, I had a client come out with a book called Soulgasms, and it's a provocative and practical spiritual path. And it's she went with a traditional publisher, yet she designed her own cover because she knew better than anybody else how to sell this book. And so even if you are going with a traditional publisher, know that no one is going to love your book and put it out there as much as you. And so if you're going with a self-publishing book, that's what I chose to do with my book, because I wanted to be able to choose the date. I wanted to be able to choose the price. I wanted to be able to bring in the profits. I wanted to be able to just experiment with all of my own marketing, much of which I would have done either way. But I just wanted to be able to do it on my own timeline without the pressure of a partner that I had to work with. And so, and so going that direction, I chose my cover. I hired my cover artist. I hired my editor, and I was able to, after I'd finished writing the manuscript, get it out and into the world in 6 weeks. And now here I am talking to Jane and having so
Well,
much
we've got
fun
a
with
question, so
everything.
let me
So
just
yes.
hop in for that from Juanita E. Mance, who also has appeared on Author Talks in the past. She says, I prefer small press for the autonomy. What do you think of small press?
I love small presses, and there are two things I would look out for. So if you're so small presses, on the one hand, there are a lot of them, and so there are a lot of opportunities, and so you want to find one that really works well for you. And so one great way to do this, because of course there can be a small press where maybe the people are struggling or something like that, and they might not be offering the best deal you can get, and so you want to create rapport and really check them out and get to know them well. However, with small presses, because there are so many, and there are so many good people who have, who have a community built, many times with Christian books, there are Christian presses that have created a community of hungry readers who you can then use that small press to get to your people. Any niche, if you are a pet lover, if you are some sort of athlete, there are presses that are dedicated to distributing those books to the audiences. Fantasy, thrillers, just there are a million small presses, and I love them. And I know people who are able to make wonderful salaries that blow me away because they're partnered with a small press. So quick answer is they're awesome. The best way to find them is if you know your niche. Small presses work in niches the best. Small presses, because it's a community. It's a very tight community. And so what you would want to do is go onto Amazon and look at other books in your niche, and then go down to the information. This is all in worksheets in the book if you want this broken down, but then you just go to the data on the book in Amazon and start to research the different independent publishers, and then you can go to their website, you can see who else they've published. But all the information, treat Amazon like a phone book for small presses. If you look at Miranda Rex, you're going to find Incubator Press. They publish her books. She runs psychological thrillers. They only market and publish psychological thrillers, but they do it bananas. They do it so well. So I hope that has answered the question on small presses. But because you don't know who you're dealing with, it's good to talk to more than one person and research it out. And so treat Amazon like a phone book, if you remember phone books, and look at books that you love, see who published them. Some are going to be self-published, some are going to be big five published, but then lots of them are going to have wonderful small presses.
Awesome. That's a great answer and advice. And thank you so much, Juanita, for that question. If anybody else has questions for Emily about the creative process or publishing, or exactly what a spiritual path regarding those things means, just feel free to go ahead and post a comment, and we'll just pop that in as we can. Let's talk a little bit about your cover, which is gorgeous. I just love that, and I feel like it is such a great fit for your book. How did this cover come to be?
So yes, I did a lot of experimenting with covers. This is something, when I published my first book, I hired one designer. He did a great cover, and I was off and rolling. Oh, I noticed Juanita is saying keeping my rights is always important to me. That's another thing, is that yes, with individual clients or individual publishers, you'll have different things around rights. And that's why it's important to talk to more than one person. Other people may take the distribution rights. A publisher needs to take the distribution rights because they're distributing. So you have to distribute in the way they want to, with their pricing, etc. But you should always have retain the copyright for your own book. So if anyone else is trying to steal your words, then that's not the small press you want to go with. And from the big publishers to the small publishers. In this day and age, in Victorian times, publishers were always buying people's copyrights. Not so much anymore. You sell your own book. So that's great. Don't go with a publisher who wants to steal your words. You own your words. They own the distribution rights. All of this is also in the all of those details to look out for are in the book when you're thinking about doing publishing contracts, about what rights you retain and what rights you don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why it's a good thing.
No, that's okay. No,
And
that's great.
yes, sorry. I love comments. I have my own, I have a group too. And so I'm always like, oh, what do you want to know? So with this, when I published my first book, it was, I could just put it out there. The cover was beautiful, but I hired a professional cover designer and they gave me something beautiful and I put it out into the world. And so with your first book, that is glorious, because you can just do your dirt. You just got to put it out there and don't be a perfectionist. Just get things going. Now, with this book, I had hired several different publishers in order to find someone who understood the audience I had built in the way that I did. And it took me a long time. It took many covers that were not for my audience, that my audience wouldn't recognize as a gift for them. And so this took a little longer. Now that I've been at this for a while, now that I've developed an audience, and my quick advice around cover art is that remember, a book is a gift for someone else. And so you really want to, if you're communicating with someone else, you want to gift wrap it in a way that so they know it's for them. In your genre, if you're doing a fantasy book, you want avid fantasy readers to recognize at a glance, this is for me. And so once you start publishing, you're going to get better and better at knowing that. And so you want to find a cover artist that you can trust so that the people who love this kind of book, this is a spiritual self-help book, and people can recognize this is a spiritual self-help cover. And then not getting your genre right can really stand in the way of book sales. So just remember, if you're gift wrapping a gift, if you were just giving it to one person and it was their birthday and you put it in Christmas wrapping paper, you could say to that one person, oh, don't be confused. This is for your birthday. But if you're selling a book, you can't talk to every individual person and be like, I know this cover doesn't look like a psychological thriller, but believe me, it is a psychological thriller. The cover just has to shout that out. I finally did a contest, and that's how I found a cover that my audience.
Well, and I feel like I remember you posting either in, was it in your group or the Artist's Way group, or both groups? But I remember you sharing, kind of like, do you like this one better or this one better, and getting some feedback on that.
That's I'm sure I shared it in both groups because I love both of those communities. I have my community, and then of course I'm really close to the Artist's Way community too. And there are two sides to that. First of all, of course, it helps you choose the best cover, but it also helps people find out that you have a book coming out. So that's actually a really fun, exciting moment for promotion. So no matter what you're doing, even if you feel like no matter what, which cover you're going to choose, still allow people to enroll people in your process, get people excited, because no matter what kind of book you're publishing, everyone I've ever worked with, I've had them ask in my group, put up your romance covers, put up your this covers, put up your that covers. So it's really good, even if you're doing it on your own Facebook page or in Facebook groups of like-minded people, definitely enroll people in the cover choice process because people start to get excited.
When I love the quote, and I tried to type that in and add it to the comments, that, a book is a gift for someone else. And I think that's just such a great point that you make, that it does need to be clear and obvious about what genre you're writing in. And as someone who's studying more about covers and trying to make sure that I get a good one. That's definitely something that I'm understanding about the process, and it definitely seems like the cover that you chose for your book is absolutely perfect.
And don't be afraid. Yes, get started no matter what. You don't have to be a perfectionist about it, because you
Do you
will tweak
recommend
as you get more
hiring a
experience.
professional to create your cover?
I do. I will tell you, and I think I could probably grab one of a client who did her own cover. I'm not seeing it at a moment's notice, so I'm not going to take the time to run around. If it's a simple self-help cover, you can do lots of great things with lettering as long as it looks really professional. So I have had people who had a background in design do their own covers. Otherwise, it's so important to get the cover right. And, even cover details like, my book is, as I've said, a spiritual path to writing and publishing. I wanted that to be huge. And a professional designer was like, no, 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 honey, don't do it huge. People will think you're weird and they won't buy your book. And so I'm like, okay, you're the designer. But designers do know all sorts of things that the publishing industry knows. And if you do it in an unconventional way, as much as we are creative and unconventional, if you do it in an unconventional way, it can negatively affect your
Absolutely.
ability to spread your
We've got
message.
another question from Juanita. She says, what about children's illustrated books? And she says, love your cover.
Oh, thank you. Children, hire a professional illustrator unless you have a concept. Another thing with children's illustrated books, partner with an illustrator, I think, is the best way to go, unless you have a really clear concept of a way you want to do this. And so minimum viable products is something that's thrown around in entrepreneurship. And so I would say in the beginning, don't allow the expense to get in the way. Try to find the best way you can to start and get it out there. But with children's illustrators, doing that much in illustration, it's really good to partner with someone who has the same concept as you, just because with illustrations, it's so much a part of the book. So yes, if you don't have the concept for yourself, make sure that you have a good relationship with the illustrator. Otherwise, it can be extremely expensive and it can
Sounds great.
miss the
Thank you
mark.
so much. Thanks again, Juanita, for that question. So one question I have is, when you were talking a little earlier about the chakra system that you came up with, and marrying that with creativity and all of the understandings and insights that you've had, you talk about the feminine creation process versus the masculine creative process. Can you talk a little bit about how those differ and how you were able to devise that perhaps the feminine creative process is the best fit for this book and for writing?
Yes, I learned it in a class, and actually I list the class in the book. So there are certain in the chapter on the crown chakra, I talk about how I went through this period where I learned so much about this stuff. And so in the book, as an add-on, I created a list of resources so you can find these things
And a
out for
free
yourself.
workbook too. I'll just
And
insert that really quick.
and so
Emily also provides a
yes,
free
the
workbook
free
that goes
workbook
along with
has
the
so
meaning
many of
method
these
to really help you dive
resources.
into the exercises and explore things more deeply. But go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes. And so I learned in this class that's listed in the free workbook about how, there's this experiential, transcendent path up the chakras, where you go from the bottom, from being grounded, being in the earth, stability, working on survival, and you're going all the way up the chakras until you get to the crown, where you're connecting with your spiritual source. And then the other one is, and so the one that I'm teaching in this book is the feminine creative process, where you take inspiration from that spiritual source and you work it down through the chakras until you ground your creation in the world where it can survive and spread and move on. And so those are the two difference. One is going through the experiential practices and the spiritual path to connect to your spiritual source. And then the other thing is moving things down from inspiration from the ideosphere and then planting them into the earth where they can make a
And
positive
is that
impact.
applicable regardless of gender? So
Yes, of course. And so we are all growing and learning and experiencing and transcending. That just goes back to the Vedas and the feminine and masculine energies, and the fact that every single human being has feminine and masculine energies. And so the feminine in this abstract philosophical tradition, the feminine is the creative, and the masculine is the transcendent or liberating. So you're getting to spiritual liberation by moving up the chakras, and you're going into feminine creativity
interesting.
by going down the chakras.
Interesting, because I know sometimes that, people again have different creative approaches. So I kind of wondered, if you're a man or identify as a man, is it going to be easier for you to almost approach creativity in a different way, as you say, moving from experience on up versus inspiration on down. So would you say that it sounds like, since it's applicable, to different genders, then it sounds like, for this, it makes more sense, for creativity to approach it from this inspiration on down perspective, correct?
Absolutely. And so gender identity, yes, despite your gender identity, if you identify as a man or a woman, you're definitely using all of these energies all the time, and you can develop them. So some of us can tend to be, let's say, more objective. That's the transcendent of being able to step outside and look at things from a liberated place, where we're not as connected. So perhaps, I am often that way. I can be both ways. And so, but perhaps you might notice men could be more that way, depending on the man, depending on his gender identity. And then women, connect and create and do things like that. So we both have both of these in us. And then even if you naturally tend to be more practical, be more objective, or be more feely, be more creative, you can develop both of these there, no matter where your starting point is, or accentuate these energies in yourself.
So
by
if someone
following
is
this path.
feeling really stuck with writing or the creative process, what would be your recommendation for getting over that block, getting over that energy block, and moving forward? What's the best thing they could do?
Well, before we were talking a lot about love and the heart chakra. So that's one really great way to do it, is just putting more love into the process. Otherwise, each individual chakra in that chapter, about all writer's blocks are chakra blocks, you can look at them in an individual way and just pull yourself through. So if you're in you're in the heart chakra and it's getting time to start editing, in the book we talk about how to move it down the system. And then the final thing that would also help with that is realizing that this chakra system is a channel. And so anytime you are if you've followed through all the way to creating a successful venture in anything that began to flourish and really create a life for itself in the world, any place you've successfully created that, remember how you did that, and then start to apply those same lessons, because that means you've created that energetic channel, tunnel down all the way to seeing something through. And so go ahead, even if it's something, I was successful as a teacher. I did it. And so I knew that because I could follow through with creating a lesson plan and, teaching
Mm.
kids and getting them on to the next grade, I knew that I could apply those same different energies from any given stage to my new profession as finishing books and running a business and all of those things. So if you do it in one area of your life, you can do it in any
That's
area
reassuring
of your
of
life.
taking those past successes and then building on those and using that as a springboard to then reassure yourself that you can write and you can finish a book and then birth it out into the world. I think that's really helpful. And again, I know that
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
have so many, nuggets of wisdom in the book that are just amazing. I feel like your book could also just have, almost like a blog post or a back page or something that just shares, so much of that. Um, I know that when I was looking at your book, again, I was,
Thank you.
highlighting and, taking a lot of screenshots and things. Let me just glance and see. Yeah, let me
Oh,
see what
thank you
I've
so
got. Like,
much.
I mean, you have magic words, at the end.
At the end, those
So,
are
as
those
an
little
example,
phrases to
Emily
keep you
writes,
going all the
magic
way
words,
through.
writing
Yes.
is not an act of genius, it's a habit. And it's easier to daydream
Mm-hmm.
about being an author than it is to write a book. And I love how you talk about the trifectas of positive habits that can help to break you out of a situation. So, can you talk a little bit about, what an example of a trifecta might be and why that three-pronged approach is good?
Oh, I love that. Yes, sure. So basically, if you ever do get stuck in a particular place, it's really good to be able to have
Mm.
go-to habits that can get you to the next phase. So, so basically, I will have at any given point in my life, I'll have my three-pronged things that I know no matter what kind of mood I'm in, whether I need to get some exercise or I need to talk to a friend, or maybe I need certain vitamins that will support my body. So being able to know that as we this particular advice is when we're going into the inner critic, sometimes it can just be as simple as not trying to argue with the inner critic or prove yourself to the inner critic. It can just be, let's get a workout on, let's do these different things. And so just having those go
I love that
to
you brought up the inner
parts.
critic. It's so funny because that's like the next screenshots that I have. But when you talk about, you say the great
Oh, yes.
advantage your inner artist has over your inner critic is that the critic is not creative. It repeats the same old fears in every situation. So once you recognize the pattern, you can cordon it off. And so you give an example, that dream you're working on is never going to happen. When my inner critic takes over, there are no opportunities, nothing makes sense, and I don't know what to do. These days, I usually recognize her and call her out because she's never been right. And I love when you say this, you don't have to be 100% enlightened and 0% ego to pull this off. If you can inch your way to 51% creativity against 49% criticism, you're moving in the right direction. The more the scale tips, the easier writing becomes.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's basically it, just to keep moving in the right direction. So I hope that helps everyone
That
keep
sounds
moving in the right
great.
direction with
Well,
their
Emily,
books.
thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about what's coming up next for you or how people can find you?
Oh, thank you so much. And I can't even tell you how wonderful it is to hear what has impacted you from the book. So yes, of course, the book is The Meaning Method, and you can find it on Amazon if you're on Kindle Unlimited. It's free. If you can leave me a review after you've read it, that helps me so much to help more people. And I will be out and about talking and answering questions. And you can find me on Instagram at emily.tamayo.maher. Really, I love hearing reactions. And if you have any questions, Jean, it's meant so much to me to know what's really affected you. And then I have in Facebook groups, I have a group called the Writer's Block. And so I do, from my heart, want this to be able to help support you in finishing your book and getting your words out into the world, because your book does matter to more than just you. It can help so many people. And so if you want to find me there, the community energy is wonderful to keep everything going. But honestly, at this moment, what's next for me is making sure more people can enjoy this book and be able to be a part of the mission and the message. And so that's really what I'm focused on right now, is seeing who this book can reach
That
and
sounds so
hearing what
great. And I
affected them.
definitely would encourage people to pick up The Meaning Method for sure. If you are interested in writing and creativity and spirituality and understanding how those pieces all work together and how you can be more effective as a writer and as a person, I would highly recommend picking up Emily's book. The Writer's Block is a great group, and Emily is so great about asking everyone what they're working on, getting feedback from people, sharing tips about how to help people move forward, asking them where they are in the process, in the creative process, and what stumbling blocks they're having. So kudos to you just for starting that, and again, like giving people a
Thank
place
you.
for that dialogue to happen.
And thank you also. Thank you, because with Author Talks, that's exactly, I mean, we're in
And
the same
I'm so
movement and
glad
we're
to have
doing the
met
same
you. And I
thing.
look forward, just to talking with you more and, learning more about all the things that you're doing. And I know that I'm going to be working deeply with your book for quite a while as I keep working on my book and getting it done. Um,
Great. Yes.
yeah.
And you know where to find me
Sounds
with
great. So
any
everybody go
questions.
check out the
So,
book.
yes.
Go look for Emily online. Go to the Writer's Block page on Facebook. And we just thank you so much for listening today. We hope that you got good things out of our chat today. I know we certainly enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it for sure. And yeah, and
I
I
enjoyed
look
it.
forward
Yes.
to
I loved it.
just and wish you so much success with the book and getting the message out there to people. And I'm sure it will absolutely impact lives and help people.
Thank you so much. That means the world. As I know, it means the world to you too, to be doing what you're doing. So, yes,
Yeah.
we're
Thank you
here to
very much,
support.
Emily.
Thank
Thanks
you
again,
so
everybody, for
much.
being here today. And next week, I will be back with Maria Price talking about her memoir, Love You Still, about her experience with having a stillborn daughter. So we will be back next week to talk with Maria about that. And thanks again. Yeah, it's gonna be
Oh, my goodness.
great.
People
Absolutely.
need that
Absolutely. So
book.
thanks so much for watching
Exactly.
Author Talks. Please like, follow, and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Emily. Bye.